Hey, this is Patrick Rady, and I'll be your host for your Basketball and Bourbon podcast. For the next hour, we'll share stories involving two of my greatest passions, basketball and bourbon. Sit back and enjoy stories shared from people who have good old-fashioned experiences from the hardwood and the barrel. As we like to say on the show here, cheers to the round ball and the barrel. Welcome, everyone. Today we're excited to have Pacers play-by-play announcer Mark Boyle on the Basketball and Bourbon podcast. Mark will be entering year number 35 as the Pacers play-by-play announcer. This season, he will surpass 3,000 games called for the Indiana Pacers. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk to Mark. Will you tell our listeners, when did you first fall in love with the game of basketball?
You know what? That's an interesting question. I don't know that I am in love with it or ever was. I've always liked it, and I enjoy it more as the years go by, and I think the NBA is absolutely fantastic. But as I've been here for 34 seasons now, it's been a long time since I've done anything else in terms of broadcasting games. I've done it all previously, Patrick. I've done college football, college basketball, I worked in the NHL. But as I stopped doing those sports and lost touch with some of the people that I had worked with or worked for or broadcast games for, I found myself as I got older becoming less and less passionate about the sport. I think if I weren't in the NBA, I probably wouldn't watch it because I would lose touch with the people. I like basketball, don't get me wrong. Football, for example, baseball, if I'm sitting somewhere and there's a game on, I'll watch it because I like the game. But I'm more in love with the broadcasting than I am with the actual sport.
My next question I was going to go to, when you're on your downtime, do you watch another game, another team, college, high school, or anything?
I watch a lot of NBA. I generally try to watch at least one, if not two games. Let's say this was the season and the Pacers were playing Detroit tomorrow. I try to watch at least two of the games they've played in the last week. Not necessarily, I wouldn't watch them the way you would. I wouldn't be looking for tendencies and tactics and strategies and how they defend the pick and roll and all that. I would be looking for little nuggets of information. And that's why, for my preparation, I watch more games than I listen to. I'm a huge fan of radio play-by-play, but I'm watching or listening or paying attention to get information. And television is more suitable for that. The guys don't have to describe all of the action, and so they tend to talk about players and things about their background that you might not get on radio because you have to pay more attention to the actual game. So I watch a lot. I watch no college or high school just because I don't really have the time. When I do have free time during the NBA season, I tend to do other things like read, watch movies, and so forth. But I watch a lot of NBA ball.
I can understand having coached high school for 29 years, 34 altogether when you coach like middle school. But when I would come home, if I wasn't scouting or watching another high school team, it was hard for me to watch a college game just because I was drained and of practice planning and scouting and stuff like that. Sometimes I just wanted to sit with my wife and watch a movie or read or whatever. And I'll have three players this year playing Division I and Division II basketball. So I watch them just because of that, kind of like you said, the knowing, but other than that, I totally understand how you're there because you do need a little bit of a break.
Well, you bring up something that resonates with me. You say you have three guys who are playing college ball, and so you will follow them and their teams. I was the same way when I was at Minnesota and Iowa back in the 80s, covering their games, and I kept in touch with them, and I watched them very closely. But soon the players that you worked with graduate, then the coaches retire or pass away, then the administrators do the same. So I look at those two schools to use an example now, and I spent 5 years covering them combined. I don't know anyone there anymore, and so I have limited or no interest in what they're doing. When I was about 15 years old, my mind works in a very logical manner, and I started to wonder why people were so passionate about results involving teams that they didn't know anybody on. I got to the point where I just couldn't bond with and I think the real sports fan enjoys sports more than I do for that reason. A guy watching a Colts game or a Pacers game cares about the Colts or the Pacers, even though they don't know anybody on the team, any of the coaches or any of that. Logically, it makes no sense, but it's the same as religion or anything else. It's faith, it's loyalty. It's not about logic. And I left that plane about 45 years ago, and sometimes I miss it. When I was a kid, I cried when my teams lost.
I did
I'm
too.
an, I'm an adult now, and I admire what the Colts have done, for example. And I've met a few of their guys at charity events and so on, but I don't know any of them. And so I just don't care whether they win or lose. That's just me, though, and I think that I missed something. It's one of the reasons I don't have a passion for sports anymore. I enjoy watching them. I'm a huge baseball fan from the standpoint of it was always my favorite sport. I loved playing it growing up, and I like to watch it now, even though I'll be sitting somewhere like at a local bar or something, and they'll have a game on from the West Coast, and I'll watch it, and it'll be the Dodgers and the Giants or the Padres and the Astros or whomever, and I'm watching it and I'm thinking, I don't know a single one of the players on either of these teams. I just don't follow the sport anymore. But when the sport comes on, I like to watch the game of baseball. I like to watch the game of basketball. If I was sitting in that same place and Indiana and Michigan came on, I wouldn't know any of the players. Oh, but there's basketball. I'll watch that for a while because I like it. But to answer, we go back to your original question. I'm just not passionate about it. My passion is for the broadcasting, and it happens to be basketball, but it could be baseball or football. It was hockey for a while. And I enjoy those sports, please don't misunderstand. But my passion is for the work, not for the sport.
All right, no, that's fantastic stuff, and you bring that up, and my wife is just going to love this because when we first got married, I'm still in, I Marty Brenneman. That was one of the highlights when I got to meet him. And I have a picture frame. And the next year I took it back, and Marty signed it to Patrick, and it is something that I will always cherish. Other than my mom and dad, I heard Marty and Joe's voice longer than anybody else. So I would be like, wow, I can't believe they couldn't get that guy out. Why? She goes, why are you so upset at people that don't even know you exist?
Yeah, see, I wondered that since I was a kid, and that's as I said, Patrick. That's where my detachment comes. But I still admire people that can do anything at a really high level. And I was a passionate sports fan as a kid, and I still admire the players, even if I don't know who they are. And I like to watch a well-played baseball game or a well-played football game. I don't make it a point. I'm not this guy. I wouldn't say, for example, gee, the Colts are playing at 1 o'clock Sunday. I better be home by then so I can watch. I would plan my Sunday, and then if I happened to be home and it was on, I'd watch it for a bit. That's the kind of sports fan I am, the casual sports fan. But you know what, and you know this, you coached for a long time, and especially at our level where, it's not cheap to go to games, and it's 81 games a year, it's 162 in baseball, so there's a time commitment there and a dollar commitment. And believe me when I tell you, I cannot express enough my appreciation for those that support us because without them, I would have to get a real job, which I would not be able to do. And so the passion of these people helps keep us employed, and I am grateful.
I am, and I'm definitely one of the guys. I am definitely passionate about the game, and I'm just going to go. Right, I had this question down, but one of the games that just really struck me was Game 1 in the 2000 Eastern Conference Finals. I was at Bankers Life then, or I guess it was Conseco Fieldhouse then, and Reggie and Jalen scored 40 points apiece. So I still remember the electricity in that place. And I can just remember, I mean, it was one of the best feelings as a fan that I've ever experienced in a live performance. What was it like to call that performance? And is that one of the best duo performances you've ever called?
I guess so. I don't remember it. I I remember the 2000 Eastern Conference Finals. The Pacers beat the Knicks to get to the NBA Finals, the only time they've gone. And I remember the end of Game 6 when it became apparent they were going to win. I think it was Game 6, wasn't it? That didn't go 7, did it? It went 6, right?
What, six? Yeah, this one was against the Sixers, the game that I'm talking about.
Oh, that was in the first round, I think.
Oh, it's first round.
Yeah, the Sixers. That was the Iverson Sixers team. Larry Brown was the coach. Yes,
Yes, yes, yes.
I do remember that game. Now that you mention it, I thought you were talking about Pacers Knicks, which was the conference final.
Oh no, the Pacers 76ers, because I was actually in the arena that night, and it was just one of the. I just they both couldn't miss.
Yeah, that was the team that went to the finals, and
Yes.
Jalen's a good story because when he came to the Pacers from Denver, he and Larry Brown clashed. Larry didn't like his style; it was a bit too flamboyant. Larry always talked about playing the game the right way. And Jalen had not yet evolved to the point where he was an effective player. He was a stylish player. And Larry just didn't care for it. So he didn't get much time. But when Larry Bird became the coach, he had faith in Jalen and he put Jalen in a position to succeed. And Jalen had some terrific years under Bird and really had a long career. He was with Chicago and Toronto, Denver before us. He had a really good career. But the teams you're talking about, or the team specifically you're talking about, I don't think was the best team the Pacers had, but it was the most successful. It's the only one that ever got to the finals.
Right, and that happened to be the year that I had a half season package. It was one of those where my wife we had decided that we were gonna. It was I think it was the opening year of Conseco Fieldhouse, I believe, and so I was one of those fans, and that was a memorable year to me because I went to so many games. I want to move to a little bit of bourbon. Do you have a everyday bourbon that you like to sip on?
I have a few that I like. Here's how I got to bourbon. Over the years, I tried a bunch of different. We all did. For example, when I was first old enough to drink, outside of beer, and I haven't seen anybody drink this in a bar for decades, my first mixed drink of choice was a screwdriver because my mom drank screwdrivers. I thought I'll try those, and I did those I've done everything. White Russians were big with me for a while, 7 and 7s, rum and coke. Yeah, I went through the whole gamut. And then as I got a little bit older, I've never had a weight problem, but I started to gain weight. I'd gain 5, 6, 7, 8 pounds every season, then I'd lose it right away in the summer. And so I decided to see if I could find something to drink that didn't need a mixer. What do I need, for example, 7 Up for? I'll be candid here. I drink for two reasons. Number one, I enjoy the ritual of it. And number two, I'm not looking to get trash, but I don't mind a nice little buzz. It makes me feel good. I don't need 7 Up for that. And I don't need those calories either. And so I decided I'm going to try to find something that I can drink straight. So I started with scotch. And I know many people really like scotch. I found it so distasteful, I just couldn't do it. So then I switched to bourbon, and I liked bourbon right away. And so, as you know, when you first learn about something, it's a process. Same as when I started smoking cigars. I didn't know much about cigars. It was trial and error and all of that. And so over the years, I have come up with a handful that I like, in no particular order. There's Knob Creek. I like Woodford. I like Elijah Craig. I like Angel's Envy. There's a few others. And at the risk of sounding as though I'm towing the company line here, you did give me a bottle of that Peerless.
Yes,
When did I see you? A couple of months ago, maybe?
months ago. Yeah.
I almost never drink at home by myself, but I opened it up because I've been curious about it. I opened it up about 2 weeks ago and tried it. And I'd read some good things online about it, so I was looking forward to it. But still, I'm a cynic by nature. And I would like some help there if you have any. It's really, really good. It's on my list. I like it. I had I'm not a connoisseur, so I'm not totally surprised, but uh, I had never even heard of it until you mentioned it. And so I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that I'd at least heard of most of the good bourbons, but obviously not, because this stuff is really good.
It is really good. They're a distillery that crafts from grain to bottle. With the bourbon, you get a little bit of a caramel toasted oak note. With their rye, it's more of a pepper, more of a like a hay and pepper taste there. They're both good. Like I said, I've never had a bad bottle from Peerless. They, as I said, they're crafted. They never source out their bourbon, never chill filtered. It's strictly from a sweet mash. They don't add any water to it. It's at barrel proof. So, and I highly recommend, I've said it before here, take a tour at the Kentucky Peerless Distillery. You will be amazed at the methods that they use, and I think you'll see why it's such a quality bourbon.
Well, A, it's good, and B, it goes very nicely with a good cigar.
I've always been interested in, I'm not a cigar guy, but always been interested what goes into finding the right cigar, and are there any cigars that pair well with bourbon?
And it's all an individual preference anyway. So I might tell you A goes with B, and then you might try it and decide no, C goes with D or whatever. It's all individual. Cigars for me are the same as bourbon in that uh, I had never, and still haven't to this day, I've never smoked a cigarette my entire life. My parents were big smokers, and I always hated the smell. And so it just never appealed to me or interested me. And I got to be, I don't know, mid 30s. And our recently retired PR guy, David Benner, who many will remember from his days as a writer with the Star, was a PR guy with the Pacers for almost 25 years, uh, or maybe more than 25 years, a long time. He was a cigar guy, and he turned me on. He said, "Hey, you want to try a cigar?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" Uh, I'm sure they had these around. Anyone listening, I think these predated me, and I'm probably as old as most people who are watching and listening. When I was a kid, we used to sit around in the summer and play poker, my friends and I, when I was a junior and senior in high school. I told you I never smoked a cigarette, and I never did, but we used to smoke these things called Swisher Sweets. Have you ever heard of them?
Yes, I can remember college days. I didn't really smoke, but I did try Swisher Sweets a couple times with some of my college buddies, so I know all good and well about Swisher Sweets.
Well, they're not really. Maybe technically speaking, they're cigars, but a real cigar smoker now would not consider. But we thought they were cool. We were smoking cigars, and we were 18 years old, and I'd had one here and there over the years. But you spend enough time on the road, and David and I were road companions for years when he traveled with the team, and I did too. And he turned me on to cigars, and he turned me on to Maker's Mark cigars. I don't know if they're still around. I haven't seen them. They come in glass tubes with the wax seal on the end. They're really cool in terms of the way they're packaged, and they're not bad cigars either, especially to start with. I'm not really into the flavored cigars anymore. Uh, I stick with the mild type cigars, a Cohiba, for example, or a CAO Brasilia, maybe a Christoph. I'm not big on the real bold, harsh ones. They're a little much for me. But there's four or five, maybe six brands right in the middle of the road there that I go with.
I'm going to be interested to research some of those
I'll
cigars.
tell you another thing about cigars. The no smoking ban started many, many years ago, and it was state by state. So there were certain states you could smoke in, and certain ones you couldn't. Even now, there are places in Hamilton County you can smoke, but you can't smoke in Marion County. So at first, I was angry because I thought, why is smoking treated any differently than drinking? It's for adults. They should be able to make their own choice. But now, as time goes on, you know how many thousands of dollars I've saved because of the smoking ban? I can't smoke in public anymore. Not to mention my health is probably better than it would have been. So thanks.
I'm from Terre Haute, and I grew up hearing Slick Leonard stories all the time. And as I said, I told you, I am so blessed to have, to me, the two greatest combos are Marty Brennan and Joe Nuxall and Mark Boyle and Slick Leonard. And it to me, it's so eerily the same. You know, you had the Joe and Slick were the old guys with the same organization they were calling that they played in when they were younger, and then you know you and Marty, yeah, they were both young when you started with those guys, and I just was so blessed to be able to hear both, to live in an area where I could get it on the radio. But the night that you called the game, you talked about having a toast to Slick, and you said, and we're not going bottom shelf. I believe I read that right. And you went with Whistle Pig. Was that?
Oh, that's another good one. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's on my list too. Whistle Pig is good. There are certain ones I buy more than others just because I'm a cheapskate. You know, Whistle Pig, for example, generally speaking, costs more than Knob Creek if you go to a liquor store. I like them both, and sometimes I'll splurge, but neither one is like off the charts expensive. It's just a relative thing. And Whistle Pig is good. I'll tell you another one that I discovered that's pretty good. Have you tried Horse Soldier?
No, that's on my list. That's on my list.
This is about this is about 5 or 6 years ago. We traveled with our TV producer at the time, who is now with the Angels, not with us anymore. He was a bourbon aficionado. He knew everything about bourbon. And I liked bourbon. That was my drink of choice. David Benner was a bourbon guy. We had one or two other bourbon guys. So on our West Coast trips, we decided each one of us would bring a bottle and then try to find something that if it's not rare or expensive, at least it's somewhat new and we haven't heard of it. So I got online and tried to look around, and I found this Horse Soldier. It's got an interesting story. It was, I don't know what the correct term in the bourbon world is, but it was invented or originated by these guys who had all been military in Afghanistan, and they decided to call this bourbon Horse Soldier. And it's good. It's very good. Not too pricey. It's in my window of affordability. See, here's my thing on money, Patrick. I don't mind spending it, but I hate wasting it. So if I can get a bottle of good bourbon for, say, $40, why would I spend $200? Even if the $200 bottle is better, it's almost certainly not 5 times better. And so that's my spend money, waste money thing. And Whistle Pig falls right in there. It's a little bit on the upper end, not like Pappy, if you could even find it, or like that, but it's more expensive than some. But it's good. If you haven't tried it, I would highly recommend it. Peerless to me is like a Horse Soldier. It was not known to me. I found it at random. In this case, you gave me the Peerless, and I tried it. I had never heard of it before, and it was excellent. Horse Soldier the same.
That's on my list to definitely try, and that's what I like. And I think what you're seeing is you see a lot of bourbons now that are what they call allocated, and you have to be either a drawing or
Yep.
spend $2,000 or $3,000 at a certain place, and then you get the right to buy. And I think what people are doing, they're recognizing there's some good bourbons in that 30, 40, $50 price range
Yes. Yes,
that
for sure.
to me it's like you can get 2 bottles for one, and so that's what I think is happening. And there are some, like I said, there's some just really good bourbons, and that's my wheelhouse, about 30, 40, $50.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Every once in a while, I'll go a little bit into splurge land
Yeah,
and do something
exactly.
different. But that's my general wheel. As I said, I can buy a bottle. That bottle of Peerless, it'll probably last me a year, because when I do drink, it's generally in the bar near my house. When I go to watch an
Yeah.
NBA game or hang out on the patio, smoke a cigar. I'm probably revealing too much here, but I have a paranoia because there's a history of substance abuse and alcoholism in my family. Yeah, I'm 61 years old and I've never had an issue, but I'm still a little bit reluctant to drink at home by myself as though it's the path to hell or something. I know it isn't, and I have done it, but I don't do it very often. And so that bottle of Peerless will last me a long time. Uh, I am popular enough at this place that I go to, and they like me. I think if I gave them like $40 and said, I'll tip you at the end of the night, but I'm bringing my own Peerless, I think they'd let me do it. But that seems like
Yeah,
bad form to me.
you get a lot of praise for your preparation. You take us through how you would go about preparing for a team that you're getting ready to play? And I'm sure it's different when you play a team in the division, team in the conference, as opposed to, say, Memphis, who you're going to see twice a year.
Well, the best is when we play the same team consecutively, which happens maybe 2 or 3 times a year, because then 90% of your preparation for the second game is already done before you play the first game. And it's a process. My process has changed and evolved over the years, and it still changes and evolves as technology becomes different, resources are more plentiful. When I started doing games, I've been doing games since I was 19. Not Pacer games, but high school games, and then, college and so on. And in those days, it was practically impossible to find anything. You knew about your team because you had seen them play on a regular basis. You knew the coach. You at least had some kind of contact with the players, even when they were in high school. But there was no internet. There was a local newspaper, and that was about it. So the preparation process was much more difficult. Now the reverse is true. You have to allocate your time and budget it, because if I wanted to, I could spend countless hours preparing for every game. There's so much information out there. But you have to decide where productivity ends, because you need to do other things like sleep and eat and rest. And so you just can't spend, I would estimate, and I've never actually tracked this, I would say between watching games, reading, doing research, updating my notes, I probably spend, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours preparing for a game in total. That's just a ballpark guess. And this is when I'll know it's time for me to quit, assuming I have good health and can go out on my own terms. Once I don't look forward to the preparation, then I'll know it's time to quit, because then I told you before, my passion is for broadcasting, not for basketball. And I want to do the best broadcast I can, and that's not possible without the proper preparation. And so it's like an iceberg to me. If you listen to a game, the actual broadcast is the part above the water. The part that leads to the broadcast is that 75% of the chunk below the water that nobody sees. That's the preparation. It's not that different than coaching. You spend hours coaching a team in practice compared to in games, and you're working on stuff and you're trying to figure out ways to get your players better, trying to get your process in order so that you give your team the best chance. And that's the same thing we're doing here. I'm trying to get my notes together in the end. And this is a process too. This was a mistake I made when I was younger, especially when it was hard to get information. Especially when you're young and learning your craft, it's, by God, I spent hours getting this stuff together. It is all going in this broadcast no matter what. But then as you get older and you do more games and you become more comfortable with the process and you understand how to use information, I would guess that I use 10% of the stuff I have. But I'd feel naked if I didn't have it. And my goal, which I have never yet achieved, I don't know that it is achievable. My goal, it wasn't my original goal, but about 5 years into my run here, I thought, what if I could find one factoid, one nugget about every player that nobody else knows? Well, theoretically, I suppose it's possible, but unless I can get unlimited time with the guys on the other team and say, hey, DeJounte Murray, you got like 20 minutes? Can you tell me a little bit about your 8th grade basketball team? It's just not possible. But it's the old perfection is not achievable, and I'm botching this, but you'll get it. It's an old saying. Perfection is not achievable, but by striving for perfection, you can reach excellence. That's what I'm trying to do. And I also know this, because when I was a kid, I followed sports religiously, and I knew everything there was to know about my teams. And so I'd listen to a game, and I'd hear these professional announcers say something that I knew was wrong, and it bothered me. And I know now that no matter how prepared I am, there's at least one person out there, if not more, who knows more than I do. And I'm not going to disrespect them by trying to BS them. That's just not the way I do it.
Totally agree. And that's why I think you're so well respected in this profession. Hey, we're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Kentucky Peerless Distillery. And when we come back, we're going to find out what Mark's starting 5 for bourbons.
The Peerless household offers an ambiance like no other. Our team is honored to share what makes the Kentucky Peerless Distilling Company so unique. Our urban distillery and vast family history are unmatched. After 5 generations of bourbon makers, we have the patience to make your favorite bourbon.
We are Kentucky Peerless Distilling Company, makers of fine bourbon and rye whiskey.
That last voice you heard there was Kentucky Peerless owner Corky Taylor. Get a chance, go down, visit Kentucky Peerless, tell Corky Patrick from the Basketball and Bourbon podcast said hello. All right, so one of the things we like to do on this show is we like to come up with a starting 5. And one of our other sponsors, the Rustic Barrel Company, if you would like them on Facebook, Rustic Barrel CO, on Facebook, and it's also rusticbarrelco.com. They are makers of fine bourbon, handcrafted from the barrels, the barrel heads. They will make anything you want, and check them out. They have a lot of their merchandise on there, things that they have made. So without further ado, if you had a starting 5 to start in bourbon, Mark, who would be your starting 5?
Well, that's a tough one. I am tempted to say Pappy Van Winkle, but I've only tried it one time. And similar to the way if I had the first pick in the NBA draft, I'm scouting a player more than once before I decide to take him with the first pick. Same thing here. I've only had it one time. I love it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I had Pappy once, but I'm like you. I wanted something that I either had or I've had quite a bit, so I went Weller, I guess, same mash bill, but I agree with you. You would want to see that or taste that bourbon more than once.
Yeah, because it has to stand the test of time. I have to have had it multiple times.
Absolutely.
To really get a feel for it. Now, there are more than 5 that I have that I would be happy to have if someone gave it to me. And in no particular order. I'm glad you mentioned Whistlepig because I would have forgotten that. That's in the conversation. Have you had Colonel E.H. Taylor?
Yes, and that's one of those that I've had for 2 years now. My brother got that, and I know that's hard to get. So that stays. That's special occasions there.
Let's see that now. I'm going to have more than 5, but you're asking for 5, so I'm going to have to pare it down. I would put Blanton's on there. It's and that's hard to find too, or at least it has been. I haven't even looked for it lately. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and be the guy that mulls it over for 20 minutes, and I'll just throw 5 out there. Let's go with Blanton's. I'll go with Colonel Taylor. Now, see, Weller I like, but I've only had it twice. So it can't be considered just because I don't have enough data. I'll go with the 2 I said. I like Woodford. Okay. This is harder than I thought it would be. I'm going to go Colonel E.H. Taylor, Blanton's, Horse Soldier, Woodford, and Angel's Envy.
Okay, all great. And I have not tried the Horse Soldier, but that is my next payday treat to me. I am going to go out and look for Horse Soldier. So I'm a Terre Haute native, and I grew up, as I said earlier, listening to Slick Leonard stories. The 2 of you became very close in your tenure in broadcasting duo. In a letter that you wrote to NBA.com, you said, people ask you to tell stories of Slick, but you mentioned that it's not about the stories, it's about the connection that you two had. Can you share with us what made your connection to Slick so special?
Well, before I do that, I do want to make sure that you understand. I know you do, but for those that are watching and listening, it's not about the stories, but the stories are fantastic. Don't underestimate the.
When we get to that, I want to hear some stories.
That's a good question. I've never really sat down and tried to analyze it or quantify it. When I came here in '88, my first partner was Clark Kellogg, and Slick was on television. But in those days, TV only did like 20 games, so they weren't on the road with us very often. When I got here, I knew who he was, but I didn't know him. And then as time went on, I got to know him. He was always so generous with his time. This was my first real exposure to the NBA. I had covered some games when I worked in New York, but I grew up in Minneapolis where we didn't have an NBA team. I worked in other places, including St. Louis before I was here. They didn't have an NBA team. So I knew of the NBA and I knew who the good players were, but I didn't know the X's and O's and the nuances of it. And anytime I wanted to bend his ear, he was more than happy to share time with me. And then Clark left me after 1 year. Then I worked alone for 4 years, except in the playoffs. They would give me a color guy in the playoffs. And we were in the playoffs every year. So I had George McGinnis, I had Billy Keller, I had Slick one time. I think I might have had Slick twice. I had Jerry Seasting. But those guys were in and out because the Pacers were first round losers in every one of those. So now we get to 93, 94, and now I know Slick a little bit better. He's done, the TV's now up to whatever it is, 35 games, and so we see him more, and by then I'd known him for a few years. And so now and I'm still working alone. It's 93, 94. It's Larry Brown's first year. So we get to the playoffs again, and they asked me, do I want a color guy? And I said, yeah, but could I have Slick? And they said, okay, because I'd had him before, and before I just let them tell me who to give me. And I thought I'd like to try it with Slick again. So I asked for him, and that was the first year the playoffs were ever successful for the Pacers. They got to the conference finals. So we did, let's see, 3 games against the Magic, 6 games against the Hawks, and 7 games against the Knicks. So that's what, 16 games. We did a 16-game run together. And it was so much fun. We just connected instantly, and everyone seemed to like it. So then in the summer, they said, what about if we made that a full-time thing? So he became my permanent partner then in time for 94, 95. And it was a combination of our personalities are so different. We got to know each other so much better because we would start spending time on the road together. He was always willing to help me learn the game. And he's such a, this is a cliche, but he's such a people person. He connects with everybody. And I'm not a people person. And so I admired that. And as time went on, we just became closer and closer. We loved working together and we became good friends. I know that doesn't really answer your question as to why. I guess that's more the process of it. I don't really know why. Why did you fall in love with your wife, or why are you still best friends with your buddy from childhood? Do you even know? I mean, you might be able to point to a few things. Like I could tell you, Slick is a people person. He was always generous with his time. But I know other people that are people person and are generous with their time, and I didn't bond with them the same way.
Right. And I think sometimes you talk about that, your love with your wife, sometimes it grows stronger and as you grow older too, in certain things. But yeah, can you give us one of your favorite Slick stories? And like you said, we love stories here.
I tell you, there's many, and in deference to PG, I can't tell all of them, but there are, and I don't, and I'm not. When I say I
Yeah,
can't tell
yes.
all of them, I'm not trying to suggest he was a drug dealer or no, nothing like that. Those are just
no.
stories that
Yeah.
are not for prime time. They're funny. They're a little bit off
Yeah.
color.
Exactly.
Anyone that knows anything about Slick shouldn't be surprised to hear this. But I'll tell you 2 that I really liked. The first time I worked with him was in the playoffs against the Celtics. I can't remember, was it 91 or 92? Anyway, I'd never worked with him. And the only time he did games was when I was doing games. So I knew nothing about anything he did. But they gave him to me for this playoff series. And we're in the old Boston Garden. We're high above courtside at center court. And he was off to my left. And this is in the days where the three-point shot was not nearly as prevalent as it is now. And so early in the game, they're moving to our right. So Slick's on my blind side. I'm watching the action to my right, and Chuck Person hits a three. And I start to call it, and then all of a sudden I hear, "Boom, baby!" And they, what is this guy have Tourette's? What is this? I didn't know of Boom Baby. I had no knowledge of it. Because as I said, when he was doing his games on TV, I was doing mine on radio. I never heard him, never saw him. And I'm thinking, whoa, well, we'll just see where this goes. Well, then, this is the early 90s NBA, so a long time went by before there was another three. And I forgot who shot it, but I started to describe it, same thing. And then I realized, okay, this is this guy's thing. So after the game, I said, "What's with this Boom Baby?" And he was just stunned that I didn't know about it. And I think everyone knows the story of it. It came from when he was coaching. He drew up a last-minute play. I think it was for Billy Keller. And he said, "Boom Baby, let's get out of here." And then he just trademarked it as a broadcaster. Well, by now we've been together, or he's passed, but he must have called 86 million threes with me by now. But I didn't know about him and Boom Baby. And that same first playoff run, that one I alluded to earlier, the 94 playoffs. One of the reasons I think, to the extent, and this is not for me to say, but to the extent that we formed a good pairing, it was because we were so different. I was focused on X's and O's. I hope anyone listening when I work alone knows that it's a Pacer broadcast. And I hope the Pacers win, but I'm not going to make excuses for poor play. I'm not going to blame the officials. I'm not going to do any of that. Slick is the other way. He's all emotion. Our guys can do no wrong, although when they do wrong, he is not immune to criticize. He will, but he blames the officials. He's a fan, except that he's a knowledgeable fan who knows more than any of us. And our styles were so different, and that's one of the ways I think that we work well together. So now we get to Game 7 of the conference finals against the Knicks. And in those days, we're way up in the Garden now, but we were about 15 rows off the floor in the Garden. And Slick was a big smoker. And he knew every nook and cranny in all of these buildings on the road. And he knew most of the behind-the-scenes people. So he always knew where he could go to sneak a cigarette. So the game gets to the end of the third quarter. It's Game 7. It's a close game. I forgot if the Pacers were ahead or behind, but it was very much in doubt. And they ended up losing in the final minute of the fourth quarter. At the end of the third quarter, he says to me, "I can't take it anymore. I got to leave." I said, "Okay." So he left. I thought he was going to go catch a deep breath, gather him. I knew he was emotional. I get that. I thought he came back with 3 minutes ago in the fourth quarter. I don't know where he was. I think he was smoking a cigarette out in the loading dock or something. And every once in a while over the years, he would get so upset because the Pacers were playing poorly, or so emotional because it was a critical game in a playoff, that he would just leave. And after a while, we just came to accept it. He didn't even say, "I'm leaving." He'd just get up and leave. Now, in the end, when he started to have health issues, I finally said to him one day, "Slick, we've been together for decades. I don't mean to be morbid here, and I'm never going to tell you what to do. You want to leave, you leave. But could you please tell us, I'm going to the bathroom, I'm going to smoke a cigarette. For all I know, you're going out there to die. That's not going to work for me. I call 911 or something." And he said he would, but he never did. He still just got up and left, and then he came back. And he was just a wonderful guy. And one of the things, this isn't really a story as much as it's just getting you aware of something behind the scenes. It was always fascinating to me. He passed in his late 80s. So when we got together in 93, he was in his 50s. And of course, he was with us. At the end, he didn't travel anymore, but he was with us on the road until well into his 80s. And it was just so impressive and amazing to me, the way he bonded with these young players. They loved him. He's old enough to be their grandfather. He would tell them how they were screwing up. He would give them tips. He would play card. He took all their money in the card games. And they just loved him. Now, the players we've had over the past few years never really got to know him because he didn't travel anymore. And now we're upstairs, and his health was such that even when he came to games, he couldn't get down onto the floor. So many of our players in the last few years never met him at all. But the players that he traveled with, it just was so impressive to me how he bonded with people who are so much younger than he was.
Wow, I think that goes back to him being in coaching and those things. I think relationships are so important when dealing with people. And what I always heard about Slick was the relationships he had with just different people.
Hey, you just reminded me of something. This is not my story. It's secondhand, but it's still one of my favorites. So do you mind if I tell it, even though I can't, I can't verify its authenticity?
Oh, absolutely.
The story goes, this was back in the ABA, and the team flew commercial in those days. But if the situation warranted it, if the plane wasn't jammed, the players would gather in the back and play cards on the floor. And I don't know who this player was if I ever did know. Slick liked to play cards. And this guy who was running the card game didn't play much. He was an end of the bench type guy. So the way the story goes is Slick went back there and saw the game and said, "Hey, you guys mind if I play?" This player said, "No, you don't let me in your game, I'm not letting you in mine." Because Slick never played the guy. So the guy said, "You can't be in my card game." And it's anecdotal. I can't vouch for it. It's second or probably even fifth hand by the time I heard it. But knowing Slick, I have no problem believing that's true.
Oh, that's great. Oh, and I'm sure, you obviously the relationship you had with him, but you just don't appreciate things, unfortunately, until they're gone. And like I said, to get a listen to you two, if I was in a car at night, driving, whatever, it was just, I enjoyed it. For me, I enjoyed listening to sports on the radio. And there's just something about a piece that I would get. And I was a little bit, kind of like what you talked about, Slick. I can remember the Pacers were playing the Orlando Magic, and I was all worked up and everything. And so I was left the house, and I took my Walkman with me back then, and I'm listening to you. And Rick Smits hits the shot, and you just say, he hit, I believe. And I just was, so I got to hear one of your best calls because I couldn't watch it on TV.
You know that? We alluded earlier to, I'll be doing my 3,000th game later this season. That was game 4 of the 95 conference finals. A loss would have put the Pacers down 3-1. Well, they won the game, and they ended up losing in 7. But it was a pivotal game because had they lost, their chances would have been virtually non-existent. And that game, it wasn't the best game I ever saw, although it was a great game. That last 90 seconds was maybe the best end to a game I've ever seen. The lead changed hands like 4 or 5 times. They would take the lead, then the Pacers would take the lead, and then they took the lead again, and then the Pacers won it as time expired. And the other thing about it, as great as our building is now, and it's a wonderful building, I'll put it up against any in the league, and it's far superior to Market Square Arena. But Market Square Arena, much like some of the old buildings, Chicago Stadium, the Boston Garden, none of those buildings compare with their successors in terms of amenities and all of the other things that we look for in buildings now. Every single one of those buildings was louder and more intimate than their successor. And Market Square, the only place, it's subjective, I don't have a decibel meter or anything. The only place I've ever heard louder than Market Square Arena is the old Arco Arena in Sacramento where the Kings used to play.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It was so loud in there for these playoff games. And, I mean, you could almost feel your brains bleeding out of your ears. And it was just, it's hard to call it intimate when there's, what did Market Square hold? 16,000 or whatever it was.
Right.
16,000 of your best friends, that doesn't seem intimate, does it? But it was somehow.
Yeah, and I loved it. Like I still miss, and that was one of the questions I had down, and you answered it there. Do you ever miss, calling a game at Market Square?
Oh, yes. And Patrick, I say that saying what I just said to you. There is no better building in the NBA than the one we play in now. But it's just not the same from that narrow perspective. Nothing like Market Square Arena as it relates to that. Now, the building now is tremendous and it's modern and they've remodeled it again now and it's state of the art. But man, there was something about Market Square and Chicago Stadium and the Boston Garden. The Boston Garden was a dump, but it was a really cool place to watch a game.
And I never got to watch live a game at Boston Garden, but growing up in Terre Haute, when I was a kid, we got to hear Johnny Most, and he was classic. And just
I'll tell you. Let me tell you, Johnny. Let me tell you, Johnny Most.
please do.
My first year in the league, Johnny was having some health issues, but he was still with the Celtics, and I wanted to meet him. I knew who he was, but I didn't know him, so I decided to seek him out. So it's before the game, and in the old Boston Garden, you had to go behind the basket and up the stairs to the first level. That's where the press room was. So I go in there and I spot him right away, and he's sitting at a table with Tommy Heinsohn and some other guy that I didn't recognize. And the man is, I shouldn't laugh because he eventually passed away, but the man is hooked up to oxygen. And I'm thinking, so this is what I have to look forward to if I stay around long enough. Yeah. He was a pleasant fellow. I never got to know him. I met him that time, and shortly thereafter, his health problems escalated to the point where he could only do a few games, and eventually he passed away. But it was kind of cool to meet a legend in the industry.
Oh, I bet. Talking about a legend, I was fortunate my senior year. I got to go see Michael Jordan play at Market Square twice. I still remember the thing I remember most about watching him there was the flash bulbs from the cameras that everybody brought. I'm not sure I've ever, I was too young. I didn't get to go see Elvis, never saw Michael Jackson, saw Ken Griffey Jr., but there are just certain players that have that awe, just type of, what was it like in those days to call a game that Michael Jordan was playing when it seemed like, and what made it is, I can remember, I don't know if you remember when Reggie kind of called the Pacer fans out, and I thought when he did that, the tide turned, and even with me, I was kind of like, and I've got a Michael Jordan poster here, I grew up, I love him. But when Reggie said that, I said, I'm an Indiana native. I'm an Indiana Pacer. You're right. I should be going and I should be rooting for the Pacers. Do you think that? Did you see a tide turn with the fans?
No, but that doesn't mean that it didn't. I don't tend to notice things.
Yeah.
I'm focused on other things.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do know that when Jordan came in with Chicago, or in later years, Bryant with Los Angeles, or James with Cleveland or Miami, it always seemed like they had more fans in our building than we did. It always seemed that way to me. I'm sure it wasn't literally true. Like our building seats around 18,000. I'm pretty sure 9,000 plus weren't Laker fans. It just seemed that way. Because for an ordinary opponent, you hear very little, if any, cheering for the other team. And when those teams came in, and when Bryant would score, or James, or Jordan, it was so much louder than it was for visitors normally. It just, I think, seemed louder than it really was. I doubt that there were ever more than half of the fans for those teams. But it was still different than when, ordinary Team A came in. Our market is small, and unlike some, Portland, for example, Utah, San Antonio, those are small markets too, but with only one team. We have a professional football team here, and our market is small, our corporate presence is limited, and so this is not meant to be a commentary on our fans, just rather on circumstances and market size. The fans we have are fantastic, but even when we had our really good teams, with the exception of the first year of what then was known as Conseco Fieldhouse, and we sold it out every night, with the exception of that, we've always been in the bottom 5 in attendance. It's not that we don't have good fans, it's just that we don't have enough of them because of our market size and the fact that the Colts drain a lot of the income that people are spending at their leisure, where I think they would possibly spend it on the Pacers. Professional football is always going to be king, no matter what. There are very few markets that have a football team and whatever other team that the football team isn't the most popular. And for our city, it's great to have the Colts. We know that. That's not what I'm saying. But for from the narrow perspective of how it affects the Pacers and their attendance and their revenues, it's a major factor.
Right, and we say it's 49 states, it's basketball, but this is Indiana. I guess that's just always frustrated me. Like I said, I try to get to as many games. When I started coaching, and especially being a head coach, it was harder to get to. Now that I've retired from coaching, I want to get back to more games. But I always had a pulse on what the team was doing, whether, like I said, whether listening to you or watching it. It really is mind-boggling that we say we're a basketball state, and we've had some really great NBA teams, and like we're talking about once-in-a-lifetime players that have basically stopped the Pacers, like Jordan, LeBron James, Shaq, and Kobe.
Yep.
Why do you think it is?
Well, I go back to the market size.
I get that. Yeah, that's fair.
This is what I would say about passionate fans. Let's say that every NBA building was limited to 8,000 fans. And so every team sold out every game. Our fans would be as loud and as passionate as anybody else. We just don't have the numbers because of the circumstances that I already mentioned. And so I think it would be simplistic to suggest that it's not a basketball state. It obviously is. Now, it might be a little bit hyperbolic to suggest it's the only basketball state,
right,
as that slogan does. The truth is somewhere in between. But I will put our fans against anyone in terms of their passion. We just don't have the same numbers that these other teams do, in large part because of our circumstances.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's good. As we kind of close down the interview here, at the end of the day, how do you want to be remembered as the radio broadcaster for the Indiana Pacers?
Well, I would be flattered to be remembered at all. And, none of us are irreplaceable. I would say this, if anyone in 25 years, if somebody that's listening to me now as a teenager says to his or her child, yeah, back in the day when Mark was here, we always knew we were getting the straight story, and he was always prepared, and he served us well. That would be, if someone said that about me, I would consider that to be the ultimate praise.
Wow. Just for me, it's been a pleasure to have you on this show this first season, and I thank you so much for agreeing to come on here and talk to us.
Well, I will say this to you and to anyone else that's listening. I appreciate those kind words. And if anyone out there would say, man, you have no idea, Mark, how much I enjoy listening to you, I would say back to them, thank you. But however high of a level of enjoyment that is, it's nowhere near the enjoyment I get out of broadcasting games for you. So thanks for listening.
Well, we thank you. And this wraps up episode 3 of the Basketball and Bourbon podcast. Check us out next week as we'll have another episode of the Basketball and Bourbon podcast. As we say at the end of the show, cheers to the round ball and the barrel.